Stop what you're doing. There's a new, really good AI model in your ChatGPT. OpenAI, they announced and actually launched GPT-5. It's a big deal. Some folks are very excited. A lot of people are very mad. We'll get into that. But it marks the first time we're at like a entirely new number increment of a GPT in over a year. But does it deliver? We're running through 3 like real life accounting firm use cases to see how it stacks up to the previous models. How big of a step is this? Then I've got 3 other thoughts for like how this is kind of reshaping what I'm thinking in the near term, how this impacts accounting firms specifically. So let's get into it. Everything accounting firms need to know about GPT-5. If you're new here, welcome to the Jason on Firms podcast. This is a podcast, so you won't be seeing me demo GPT-5. You want to see more visual demos, check out the Jason on Firms, the main YouTube channel. If you're watching this on YouTube, we got an audio feed as well. But this is GPT-5 for your ears, since most people listen to this on audio. So, for context, GPT-5, it is a new generation of AI model from OpenAI, the folks behind ChatGPT. OpenAI, historically awful at naming their AI models. Back in November of 2022, when ChatGPT first came out, the model behind the scenes there was GPT 3.5. The following March, we got GPT 4, and just now we are getting GPT 5. How long is that? That was spring of 23 we got GPT 4. So over 2 years later. Took over 2 years to get 5. Nobody would have guessed that. But in the middle there, we got other models like GPT 4o. O, I think, stood for Omni, and it was like an upgraded version of 4, even though these models, like even the ones with the same names, every few months they actually get upgrades. So there's like a March version of the model and a May version of the model. But just like the confusion around all the naming, completely understandable. They went from 4 to 4.0, then launched O1. And that was the first quote unquote reasoning model. That is, the model will actually think about its answer before it comes back to you. And that was beneficial for a number of reasons. Kind of like talking to a person and you ask them a question and they give you an answer that's just a little bit too fast. And you're like, I don't trust that you actually knew that off the top of your head. These thinking models, they would do just what the name implies. So we had O1, then we had O2, and then we had O3. So before last week, inside of your ChatGPT, you very confusingly had a model called 4.0, which was older and weaker than the model called O3. And I can't tell you how many people, in fact, I'm coming off a run of several weeks of accounting AI like live summits. I can't tell you how many people were like, man, AI sucks at XYZ. And I'm like, it ought to be able to do that. And I ask them what model they're using. And they're like, the newest one, 4.0. And I'm like, no, that was actually a lot worse for technical accounting stuff than O3, which is a thinking model and newer. And so OpenAI's solution to all of this is supposed to be GPT-5, one model to rule them all, which actually isn't one model. It is a whole bunch of different models with a built-in, what they call switcher. So the idea is you can rock up, talk to GPT-5, and it will sort of assign out whatever you tell it to do to like the model that makes the most sense, GPT-5 or GPT-5 thinking, which is like the reasoning version of it. But they knew the naming of all this stuff was super confusing, and that was part of what, that was a big problem that GPT-5 was supposed to solve, is the simplification of not having to know what model to use for X, Y, and Z, thus making ChatGPT a little more accessible for non-experts. But in the process of doing this, they took away access to all of those previous models. So your 4.0, your O3, your O3 Pro, your 4.1, 4.1 Mini, all these old models, poof, overnight, they disappear. You can't use them anymore. And so all the hardcore nerds are ticked right now. They're like, you just did a rug pull of 8 old models, and instead all I have is this new model, which right now has some issues. The whole like switcher on day one actually wasn't working at all. And right now it can kind of be frustrating because it feels like you've lost some control. It's deciding things for you that maybe you wanted the ability to decide for yourself. A great example. One of the example use cases we're going to go through later, I ran it once and it thought about it for 2 seconds, gave me a bad answer. I immediately ran it again and it thought about it for 4.5 minutes, gave me a great answer. Another example, Sam Altman tweeted an example of him like prompting it to make like a song about the GPT-5 release with I think it's called BeatBot. It's like this drum sequencer that's evidently built into ChatGPT. And I'm like, I didn't know that was a thing. So I pulled up ChatGPT on iOS. I put the exact same prompt in that he showed, and GPT-5 responds, I don't have access to BeatBot, but I can tell you how to go out and use it. And I'm like, what do you mean? Sam Altman literally right here says he can do it. I then tried the exact same prompt in the browser, like chatgpt.com, and it worked. So frustrating right now. Seems like you get different results depending on where you go. And this is a temporary problem, but this whole thing, like we've been building up to, GPT-5, this new amazing model, and we want to have this big sort of ta-da moment when it drops. Right now, it feels like that's really been lost due to like the switcher inside of GPT-5 not doing what we want. They've already said they're going to bring back some of the legacy models and give you a little bit more control over picking what model it uses. So they're already kind of caving to the more hardcore folks that want a greater degree of control. Hopefully in the coming weeks, we see some rapid improvements here because it does impact the overall usability of it and kind of be a frustrating experience. At the moment, as I'm recording this, you do have the option to pick between GPT-5 and GPT-5 thinking. And for all but quick, like sort of creative brainstorming, for accounting firm stuff, you will almost always want to use GPT-5 thinking. That is where it'll take anywhere from 1 to 10 minutes to kind of process the problem and give you a result. And most of the examples I'm going to give you here, they are like actual accounting like work. And for sure we can use AI for other things, like all the things we are not expert in, like give me a marketing plan for XYZ or help me rewrite this. And for many of those things, the non-thinking version of GPT-5 will be better. But for like the real technical stuff where we want to make sure it's giving us a right answer with no hallucinations, you will almost always want to use GPT-5 thinking. And you can actually prompt it, like some of the examples where if you tell it to think long and hard about this, it will almost always use thinking. But you can also in the model selector just force it to use thinking. And I don't know. I just don't trust it to like pick that correctly for itself yet for whatever reason. But the highlights on GPT-5 in the kind of benchmarks, the big brain benchmarks of how good can it be, it beats all the previous stuff as you would suspect. But interestingly, it's only marginally better than ChatGPT's agent mode. So we talked a few weeks back about a big release, this new agent mode that has like a built-in browser. Previously, we had a version of something similar called Operator, but it wasn't really all that great and it was only available on the $200 a month Pro plan. Now, on all paid plans, notably the Team plan, which if you are an accounting firm using ChatGPT, you want everybody on the squad using the Team plan. So you can create a team plan account and then add members of your firm to it. Comes with all the data security required for using this with like actual client information. Prevents things like being able to share conversations externally. If you saw the headlines the last couple weeks about being able to find people's ChatGPT conversations on Google and how it's like this big ChatGPT security breach, is not the case for anyone using a ChatGPT team plan. Please don't cheap out on this. Get your team actual. Get the folks in your firm ChatGPT team licenses. So everybody with a team license, you've got access to this agent mode, which on the benchmarks is still almost as good as GPT-5, and potentially for accounting workflows might still be better because one thing it's particularly adept at is spreadsheet stuff. It was actually a big step forward than anything in the past at like working with Excel files. And I've actually got one example we're going to go through of where I think agent mode is still superior than GPT-5. And all that means is when you're inside of ChatGPT, if you're giving it a prompt, you just click the tools button and select agent mode. There's a little toggle there to enable agent mode. Yes, there's a little plus button and then you just enable agent mode. But otherwise, GPT-5 is the best on all the benchmarks. But interestingly, the way that they introduce it on the GPT-5 landing page is they say, quote, it is the strongest coding model to date. And writing code, it is still like the biggest, most powerful use case for large language models, arguably. And like with each new model, what they're actually benchmarking is its ability on like math problems and writing code and science and stuff like that, because those are more deterministic sort of things where you can have a question set and a very clear answer of, is it more right or is it more wrong than the last model was? But for accounting firm stuff, man, like there isn't a clear benchmark of what's it better at, what's it not better at. And so a model that's better at coding, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's any better at accounting stuff. And even accounting stuff is so broad because there's so many different jobs that accounting firms are tasked with. I didn't actually know if this was going to be any better than past models. Initial impression is I actually do think it's a pretty good step. We're going to get into that. So, candid accounting, 3 tests. Stuff that I've done on past models that I want to run through this new model to see how it works. So, test number 1, just give it a balance sheet, a profit and loss, and the full general ledger detail. So the scenario is basically we're finalizing a month-end close. It is a month-over-month comparative balance sheet and P&L, and then 2 months of general ledger data. In the past, when I would give this to the previous best model, O3, it sucked at reviewing this. And part of the problem was a balance sheet and a P&L and a general ledger. That's a lot of information. And the AI model had a hard time knowing what to prioritize, which, in my opinion, as a big-brained accountant, you start with the balance sheet, right? And then you go to the P&L, and you only really dig into the GL where necessary. But if the GL is 30 pages, and the balance sheet's 1 page, and the P&L is 2 pages, and I give all that stuff to the AI tool, it has a hard time not just getting tripped up on all little fiddly things in the GL. And so all I'm doing is I'm giving it these 3 financials and saying, like, you're an expert accountant, you're gonna review this for factual correctness. I don't care about insights about the health of the business, just make sure the accounting is correct. And as an example, the very best that it could do before, and this is actually using O3 Pro, which was an even better version of the previous best model that was only available on the $200 a month plan. I'll read through the items that it found in a set of financials from basically the demo file in QuickBooks Online, Craig's Design and Landscaping. I'll tell you the results from the previous best model, O3 Pro, and in that prompt, I tell it, order your findings starting with the thing that is most likely wrong, and then, kind of order them in decreasing likelihood of wrongness. So the very first thing, or what it thinks looks most wrong, I want it to put at the top. And then as we go down the list, it's less and less likely they're wrong. So here's what the previous best model found. Number 1, net income line on the balance sheet. It's probably wrong. It says because it doesn't match the May P&L figure. Well, the net income line on the balance sheet, it would only match the monthly P&L figure if that was January, right? So the balance sheet's showing year-to-date net income. The comparative P&L for May and April is just showing those 2 months standalone. There's not a year-to-date column on the P&L. So the number 1 most likely thing that O3 found that is probably wrong is, you can throw that out. It's totally wrong. Number 2 thing is that miscellaneous expense has $2,900 in it. It says underlining bills are for normal costs, like $250 for hardware, $2,000 for insurance, $600 for subcontract masonry work. That's a good one. That's a great point. Number 3, pest control services revenue is negative. That's fine. Number 4, Board of Equalization payable has a negative balance. Fine. Number 5, undeposited funds has gone up. Most of these are yeah, probably. But then number 7 is a large negative opening balance equity. And so on the balance sheet, it's negative 9,905 in May, but then positive 5,000 the previous month. For me, that's probably number 1, either 1, 2, or 3 in the magnitude of, well, that's very obviously wrong. Opening balance equity shouldn't have swung 14 grand in a month. So a few other items on the list. They've got 9 items in total that are yeah, those are probably good. That was the findings of O3 Pro, the previous best model prior to GPT-5. Here are the findings of GPT-5. For 1, it blocks them out into 2 sections. First, a section for balance sheet issues. Second, a section for income statement issues. We'll start with the balance sheet one. Issue number 1 that it finds, a $200 transfer appears one-sided. So what it did is it went into the general ledger detail. It found a transfer to a savings account, but then on the checking account side, that $200 transfer was batched with several other things that came out of the checking account. And so on the split account in the GL report, it just says split. It doesn't detail out the $200 that went to the savings account. It says this is probably wrong. Not looking good, right? That's not wrong. That's just an issue with the reporting. In fact, I don't even know in QuickBooks Online how to get a general ledger report that doesn't present each item. For example, if you pay $800 out of the checking account and it goes 4 different places, I don't know how to get that to show up as 4 lines under checking on the GL. I think you have to actually use the journal report. Anyways, this first one it finds, it's not an issue. So that's too bad. Second thing it finds, opening balance equity. Okay, that would have been high on my list too. This episode is brought to you in part by Stanford Tax, one of my favorite new tax, AI tax workflow tools. Stanford Tax, actually heard from a big number of you very happy users. Stanford continues to evolve, and one of the big shifts in 2025 is that it is now not just a tool for like serving as a portal for your clients to submit information into, but it's also just an internal tool for your firm now because it does so many useful things with those source docs. So basically you pile in all that info that the client gave you, and it will compare those items against the pro forma checklist that it generated and tell you, okay, what do we have now? What do we still need? But it will also bookmark those documents. It will rename the documents. It will warn you about stuff like it being the wrong tax year. It will split bundled documents. So if they give it to you in a single PDF, it'll figure out how that ought to be broken out. The number of years I was putting like divider pages in and sitting in front of that scanner, if you know, you know. And Stanford now rolls all that up into a binder in the cloud where you can do your PDF annotations right there inside of Stanford Tax, okay? Down with Adobe Acrobat. The world doesn't need us drawing more red squares in Adobe Acrobat, okay? This excites me because it's pulling all this stuff into the cloud where every new AI model makes this whole workflow better. That's super exciting. To learn more about Stanford Tax, check out the link down in the show notes. This episode is sponsored in part by Ignition. Come. Here's the thing about client billing. You can't bill for the time you spend billing. You can't. It is pure waste. And we're bad at billing because it's icky. You let things slide, you don't get paid. You waste time chasing people for money. That's not what I did. I didn't want to waste time chasing them, and so I just eat it. Don't do that. This is where Ignition comes in, the leading revenue generation platform for accountants and professional services. When I was running my firm, Ignition wiped out our AR, it's true, and significantly reduced the time spent billing clients, saving our partners over 1,000 hours in the first year because they didn't have to bill all that stuff manually, man. With Ignition, we won more business with impressive online proposals. No more hustling PDFs and Word docs. We automatically pulled payment up front or at the end of a job when it was done. No more dialing for dollars. We transitioned our firm to more recurring revenue and better managed scope creep. No more leaving money on the table. Ignition is making thousands of firms more money and genuinely made us more profitable. Check out why over 7,000 of the smartest businesses run on Ignition at ignitionapp.com. Put a link in the show notes. Third one, there's a fixed asset, a truck at $13,495, but no accumulated appreciation. All right. Fourth issue, undeposited funds has gone up. But importantly here, it identifies two payments from the GL that ought to have cleared. A $1,675 payment and a $387 payment where it's like, these look too old specifically. Look into these payments. That's a much higher quality answer than we got from the previous best model. It called out the Board of Equalization payable that was negative, but also said there's another current liability account called Arizona Department of Revenue payable. Says consider making the tax agency naming convention more clear and consistent between these two accounts. Kind of interesting. Then it called out two loans that were new loans, a $4,000 one and a $25,000 one. On the income statement items, biggest issue was the miscellaneous expense, $29.16. Then it has sub-bullets for every item in there and where it should be classified and offers to give you a reclassifying journal entry to fix it. And then it calls out some other stuff like in this accounting file, there's like COGS accounts that are pretty much named identically. And it goes through and it's like, your naming here sucks. For example, you've got an account that is COGS : job expenses, and you've got an account that's job expenses : job materials. It gives you suggestions for how to make that more clear. It even called out that there's an account lumber that is under the parent account services income. It says move this to be under the parent account sales of product income. It found an equipment rental that was under operating expenses that should have been under cost of goods sold because it referenced a job. And check this out, number 6, meals and entertainment, $28.49. It says if you track tax-deductible meals separately, e.g. meals 50%, split this from any entertainment or non-deductible categories. Good bot, right? That's pretty good. So here's the thing. The GPT-5 answer here, it was very good, with the exception of the very first thing that it returned with this, it's saying this transfer appears to be one-sided. Now, we could probably improve the prompt here to say, assume that like system things are working totally fine. Like QuickBooks wouldn't let you post a one-sided entry, right? So you could probably improve the prompt here that's like, we trust QuickBooks to actually present this correctly, which maybe we shouldn't. But something like a one-sided transaction transaction couldn't happen. Otherwise, what it presented here, this is much, much better than we've seen from any other model. And if there's one thing that this is tremendously useful for right now, it is the juniors in your firm. You think back to the early days of you being in an accounting firm, and you just got so many dumb, ignorant questions, and how long it takes you to grow out of that. Imagine having this, the most patient tutor of all time, where there's no dumb questions. Unlike asking your senior a question, and then 7 minutes later having another question, and you're like, oh, now I gotta wait a couple hours and look like an idiot, like asking them another question, right? I think stuff like ChatGPT, like AI, I think this vastly accelerates the growth of everyone entering the profession in a really exciting way. And it's funny how, like, us old farts, I say this as a 37-year-old, are like, how am I gonna make the time to use AI? And then you have kids coming out of school right now that have used AI to write every essay in the last 3 years, and they're just freaking wizards with it. And they can't imagine entering the workforce and not working with AI every moment of the day. We're like, how will I ever make time to use it? Well, they're like, this is the only way I know how to operate. And we look at them and we're like, well, that's problematic. And they look at us and they're like, why are you doing all this crap manually? And the right answer is probably some marriage of those two things, right? But those kids coming out of school into the workforce, are they Zoomers? I don't even know what they are. I think they're going to have such a faster growth trajectory with really good AI like at their fingertips. That's really exciting to me. So that first test, just a totally open-ended review of a balance sheet, income statement, and GL. I would say it's a pretty big step up. And again, we're not prompting it in a specific way or saying, here's how an expert would review it. We're leaving it up to itself to figure out how to review it. Now, there's a GPT-5 Pro also, which is only available on the $200 a month plan. And you better believe I have the $200 a month plan because I'm a nerd like that. I put the same task to GPT-5 Pro. It worked a couple minutes longer and the answer was marginally better, but I wouldn't say it's like worth springing for it. In fact, the bigger issue with the Pro plan of ChatGPT is it doesn't come with the same data protections as the Team plan, so it's not really useful for business purposes. But just out of curiosity, I tested the Pro plan. It was a little bit better, but not a huge amount. Okay, second test. This is one we started doing when that agent mode for ChatGPT came out, specifically around hustle and spreadsheet stuff. So what I've got is 7 tax source docs. So W-2s, 1099-Rs, 1099 interest, a brokerage statement, a social security statement, just government forms, 1040 source docs. But then I've got a Excel workbook from Excel1040.com, this amazing workbook this guy puts together every year. It's got like 60 tabs and all of these input tabs for all of the tax data, and then other tabs that recreate government forms based on what you put in the input tabs. So I gave this to GPT-5, the spreadsheet, and then the 7 tax documents in PDF form. And I say, take all the data off these PDFs and put it into the Excel workbook. Now, ChatGPT Agent, when you enable that agent mode, it does this flawlessly right now. It takes about 10 or 15 minutes for it to do it, but it will pull several hundred figures from the PDFs and put them into the correct places in this 60-tab Excel workbook. It is pretty wild. Now, there's got to be an upper ceiling to this. Like, I'm giving it 7 tax docs, but what happens when you give it 50 tax docs? I suspect it won't work, but it's not because the AI model isn't good enough right now. It's because it isn't allowed to work long enough yet, which is an interesting distinction, right? Like, that just means that on my $30 a month ChatGPT team plan, that's going to burn down too many servers for me to be allowed to have a thing that can work for like an hour at a time, right? And so that's actually a new feature that I need, is the ability for it to work longer. And AI models are actually good enough for that. But anyways, ChatGPT Agent, it does this flawlessly, but I gave this task to GPT-5 and I couldn't get it to work. In fact, I couldn't even get it to make a functional Excel file. And I'm giving it the input spreadsheet. I'm like, this is like the work paper template we use in my firm, so just modify this. I tried this several times, couldn't get it to actually complete. And the couple times it said it did, the Excel file it gave back wouldn't work. I then tried GPT-5 Pro, the one that's available on the $200 a month plan. I'm like, maybe it just needs more horsepower or something. And bless its heart, it's been thinking for about half a day now. I'm pretty sure something's broken, but that doesn't feel very usable to me. So for completing an Excel spreadsheet thing, I still think agent mode is better. So instead of just using GPT-5, hit the little plus button right next to the field where you type in your prompt, hit the little plus button, toggle on agent mode. And if you needed to do something with a spreadsheet, use that agent mode instead of just GPT-5, which is, in my experience, it's just kind of been a mixed bag with spreadsheet stuff, but agent mode, very, very good at spreadsheet stuff. All right, last test I did, number 3, giving it a checklist of review steps and the financial statements. So test number one that we did was not giving it any checklist items, just saying review this stuff however you want to do it. But this test is reviewing it by performing a specific set of steps. And I'll be honest, I'm not sure if the future looks like just letting AI review it however it wants to review it, or if the future looks like it reviewing it according to our prescribed process. Right now, the latter feels easier, right? Because we can trust that it's actually checked the things that we want it to check rather than it just choosing its own adventure. And this is something that historically models haven't done very well. And so a very basic test that I've used back several years now is getting it to review 3 things on a balance sheet. Here are the 3 things. You ready? First, make sure it's cash basis. Second, make sure total assets equal total liabilities plus equity. And third, make sure it is a comparative report. That is, it is a current period compared to a previous period. This is the format that we send our financial statements out in my firm. There's 100 other things that ought to be on that checklist, but let's start with 3. And to date, AI hasn't been able to do those 3 things. And so, for example, if you throw this at the 4.0 model, it gets super tripped up on, for example, QBO, even on cash basis reports, we'll put accounts receivable or accounts payable with $0 balances, even though it's a cash basis report. And 4.0 will come back with things like, well, I see AR here, so it's accrual basis. Or oftentimes it will say, oh, I see a credit card balance here, so obviously it's accrual basis. And when you see that, it just makes you sad because you're like, this thing's right. This thing is like top, 99.9th percentile in the world at writing code, but it sees a credit card payable and it thinks that makes it an accrual basis balance sheet. Like that's annoying. So 4.0 didn't do this well. The previous best model, 0.3, it did it better, but still not great. It would still make dumb mistakes like that. In fact, that was where I saw the credit card payable example was with the previous 0.3 model, which is just wild. But ran the same test with GPT-5. I'll just tell you the findings, is where on the previous models, I had to do a whole bunch of detailed prompting, like telling it, okay, if you're going to decide whether it's cash or accrual basis, like usually somewhere on the financial statement, it will say that and look for that. And to determine if it's a comparative financial, like you'll see 1 month in the previous month or 1 year in the previous year. And I had to tell it how to do all this stuff and it would still do it wrong. With GPT-5, all I did was gave it a very concise prompt. Number 1, figure out if it's cash basis or accrual basis. Number 2, make sure total liabilities and equity equal total assets. Number 3, make sure it's a comparative financial statement. That is, it compares a current period to a previous period. That's it. No other instructions, and it nailed it. Tried it on a few different balance sheets, totally fine. Now, that's not rocket surgery, right? Like those 3 things, that's not super hard. But this is kind of like the tax work paper example, where once the model's good enough to make those determinations, the bigger question then is how long is it allowed to work? Because having it go through a 100-item checklist on every single set of financial statements that we do, that's pretty interesting, right? That's pretty juicy. The day we get to where AI can complete a checklist as good as a human, which, by the way, not a high bar, because as soon as a human sees a checklist, like their brain goes into this sort of autopilot where they can't check those things fast enough. But if I could put that same checklist in front of an AI, I wouldn't put a 100-item checklist in front of a human, but in front of a computer, no problem. In fact, that's kind of exciting, right? The notion that we could put endless checklists in front of this to make sure we never make that same mistake again. And so if it can do 3 at a time, what we actually need is the ability for it to think longer so it could also do 300 at a time. Because if it's good enough to do these 3 things, it's probably good enough to do a little more complicated things just in a more modular way or with more time to think about it. So I gave it a slightly longer checklist. I added 3 more things. I added a 4th task for it. I said, make sure that there's no accounts presented that have $0 balances for both periods. I was trying to go back to when we do compilations and reviews and stuff like that. Like what are the formatting things we would look at that were kind of the policies in the firm for how we would present financials? 5th thing was make sure that we're always using dashes instead of zeros. That was a formatting thing we did on my firm. And then 6th thing, identify any accounts with non-normal balances. That is, if the normal balance is a debit, then call out if it's showing a credit or a negative balance. So I chucked this at GPT-5, did it flawlessly, really good. 6 things, called everything out exactly right. I don't know what the ceiling for this is, how many items it can do. Whenever you're trying to get AI to do something for you, you kind of have to think of what is the cumulative cognitive load of what I'm asking for. 6 really easy things, maybe it can knock that out no problem. 6 really big complex things, I see the folks that just don't get it with AI yet, this is usually what they're doing. doing is they're giving this 30-step process to AI, and then it falls on its face, and they're like, AI is dumb. It's like, no, like you got to chunk this stuff out for the very practical reason that OpenAI right now won't let ChatGPT work for an infinite amount of time because that's very expensive for them, and I'm only paying $30 a month for this. So I always think about like, how much am I asking it to do at a time? But these 6 sort of fairly simple review tasks, it had no problem with. But I think the more interesting product of this test is the last thing that I have it do, which is create a work paper to show your work, right? We always got to be thinking about AI almost as the intern in your firm, where it's like, yes, it can do really cool things, it's very useful, but the provability of what it did, that still matters too, because I'm not going to blindly trust the output. I then have to prove, is like what it did actually correct? And if it takes me twice as long to do that, that's a pain. So on both the 3 checklist item and the 6 checklist item prompts, I had it then create a PDF work paper. Page 1 of the PDF work paper was supposed to summarize its findings for each of the checklists, or the checklist items. So page 1 has, 1, 2, 3. In the case of the 6 item 1, for all 6, it would identify its sort of summary findings on page 1. But then I told it after that, include the entire balance sheet and annotate it in a color-coded way to make it easy to go from page 1 and see what on the balance sheet after that you saw that made you answer it that way. And the previous best models, it would really struggle with this work paper prep stuff, but it was adorable to see it try. Like it would draw like little red circles and squares and arrows. It was really, it was almost like my children trying to mark up a PDF in a very rudimentary way. It was cute to see it try, but in the end, it wasn't all that helpful. Now, GPT-5, work paper prep, big upgrade, buddy. Today's episode is brought to you in part by TeamUp, who helps you hire talented accountants in the Philippines. Did you know you can just hire someone in the Philippines? That's the thing that you can do. Similar to hiring cross-country, like most of us run distributed teams these days, you can hire somebody that's in the Philippines. Now, oftentimes, big question, if you haven't done this before, is security. What about security? To which I'd say, what do you do for security for your onshore team? If I hire somebody in North Carolina, or for goodness sakes, Florida, what do we do for them? Well, probably ought to give them a specific work device, have like on-device encryption, the ability to disable the machine remotely, all of those things, important things to do for any hire, exact same things you do when you hire somebody in the Philippines. Only real difference for US firms is you have 7216 disclosures if you do tax work. Actually, if this person will do tax work, and for most firms, that's 2 disclosures that you got to put in front of the client. Not a big deal. TeamUp, they've worked with loads of firms that have navigated all this, can give you the verbiage recommendations. I did it myself in my firm, disclosures and everything. Wasn't as big of a thing as I built it up to be. And I went 4 for 4 on my Philippines hiring, and I had never gone 4 for 4 with onshore hiring. Maybe I got lucky. I didn't get lucky. There's like a different attitude towards work with folks in the Philippines. Literally 3 days ago, somebody at an event, we were talking about their team, and they're like, man, it's like refreshing. Anyways, if it's something you've ever considered, chat with the folks at TeamUp, as I think this person had. They actually hired those folks through TeamUp as well. It's one of those things that seems more spooky until you actually do it. Learn more about TeamUp, check out the link down in the show notes. This episode is brought to you in part by ClientHub, the practice management system. If you are considering a new practice management system, there's no way that you're not overwhelmed. Let me give you the TLDR on who are the people that need to be exploring ClientHub specifically. ClientHub started out as a really good sort of 2-sided task management system for bookkeeping firms. So you've got your own tasks to manage, but we also push tasks to clients when they're holding us up and we need information from them to get that stuff done, right? ClientHub was one of the client portal first PMs that makes that as smooth as possible for your clients. But increasingly, they're getting into all things workflow, specifically your bookkeeping workflows. And so if there's one thing it does really well, it is for folks that don't want to have a standalone like month-end close automation platform, but then a totally separate PM over here. ClientHub might be the best marriage of those 2 things in a single place. So if you want more like power user month-end close automation stuff, but a version of that is like inside of your practice management system, worth giving ClientHub a look. Check out the link down in the show notes. So on the 3 checklist item test, the PDF that it comes back with has a very nicely formatted page 1. And each of those items, item 1, item 2, and item 3, the heading for each of those sections is shaded in a specific color. And then you go to the balance sheet after that. For example, like the first item that's figuring out, is it a cash basis or accrual basis balance sheet? That is shaded yellow on page 1. You go to the balance sheet after that, wouldn't you know it? The little cash basis label on the balance sheet is shaded in blue. Did I say it was blue on page 1? Whatever. It got the color right. You go to number 2. It nicely shaded the column headings that said, March 31 and then April 30 side by side. It shaded that as proof that it was a comparative balance sheet. Number 3 was, do total assets equal total liabilities plus equity? It did all the coloring on page 1, but didn't actually mark up the balance sheet. So everything about the work paper looked very good and convincing and almost human. In fact, page 1 looked better than what your average accountant would give you. The only thing it missed was the shading on the total assets and total liabilities and equity. And really, that ought to just be like highlighting the total assets line and then highlighting the total liabilities and equity line. So I didn't get that, but it was a very big step forward from the last model. I tried to do the same on the 6-item checklist, and the work paper got worse. It still did the page 1 very good and had different colors for each of those items. But the markups on the balance sheet itself, it was a lot to look at. It was a little hard to read. And all of this brings me back to, so kind of what are my 3 main thoughts that I'm left with here, having done some initial testing, and where do I see this going in the near term? First big thought is just the notion that we need to build out sequential steps. Build out workflows in more modular ways. And like building out this work paper is a great example. GPT-5 can do 3 checklist items in these basic examples very well. It can create a pretty good work paper, but I can't give it 30 items. And it would be really nice if either I could give it 30 items and it would chunk out the process itself, or if I could build in more modular ways, like distinct little workflows that were bite-sized enough for it to handle, and then have it immediately hand that off to like the next workflow, run that stuff in the background. Now, I think there's a version of this that could almost be like GPTs. So GPTs, or custom GPTs, are like little assistants you can make in ChatGPT to do a very specific job. So for example, I can make a GPT for the HR documents in my firm. I give it the employee manual and any other knowledge it needs to have. I say, all you do is parrot things from the documentation to answer questions. And then I can share that GPT with my team so that they can just go to the bot, ask it a quick HR question, rather than have to find all the potential places that something related to that could be in our company documentation. Great time saver. GPT is a great way for you, maybe the biggest AI nerd in your firm, to create tools that can be used by the rest of your team. But I would love to have something similar that's more workflow oriented, where it's like, how do I run like these 5 GPTs in sequence? And the results of one GPT hands off to the next one. And they probably wouldn't be called GPTs, but like a more sort of workflow angle for handling larger tasks that we could chunk out. And there are some tools out there that will do this right now. One is called Lindy. One is called Gumloop. They're almost like Zapier, if you've ever used that, but for AI workflows specifically. The problem is, man, I just want that stuff inside of ChatGPT because I don't want to have to pipe all my client data through yet one more system. And so I'd love to see a way to more sequentially handle bigger, more complex workflows. Second thing that's a takeaway for me is we talked about how GPT-5 is held out as like the most advanced coding model there is now. I still don't think that we think enough about AI as the tool to build the tool to do the job, if that makes sense. So take for a basic example, Excel like macro scripts. Most of us don't know how to write macros, and there's a good number of us in the audience who do, and that's fine. But for those of us who don't, AI, right now, it can build like flawless scripts for your spreadsheets. I would encourage you, give it the actual spreadsheet that you're trying to write the script for, and then it'll use the correct like tab workbook names and stuff like that. But it'll write flawless macros for you so that any sort of transformation or recurring job we do in a spreadsheet, we can now use AI to write a macro to do this for us. But as you know, AI can also write like entire apps to do specific jobs. But the problem with its ability to write code is then where does that code go? Because if I have it write a useful little app for me and my team, right now, it is very hard to put that app into, production or into some environment where the rest of my team can use it. This, I think, is another opportunity for like a sort of custom GPT style, here's this little app, and I can share this app with the other members of my team. Because then your AI champions, your most competent AI people in your firm, they can make these little micro apps that your team can then use also, and it can all just live inside of ChatGPT, similar to how your custom GPTs do now. The whole notion that like AI gives you the superpowers to write code and sort of create apps now, like that's wildly powerful. And the code writing is good enough to do that right now. The problem is we're not like developers that are working on big code bases that are already in production. We're like, I just want you to draft up like this dashboard for me with a knob here and a dial there. And it can do that very, very well, but then where does it go? That's the problem. It doesn't have anywhere to go. And so we could totally scrap together all sorts of useful things for our own workflows. The problem is they're not shareable. They're not like persistent. As the AI models continue to get more powerful, I would argue right now they're plenty good for writing very good code. They have been for a while. The bigger problem is what do I do with that app that I just made or generated the code for? I need somewhere to put it and to be able to share it with my team. Last, number 3, third sort of big thought coming out of this. We're real close. In fact, we're already there in basic applications. We are real close to tools like models like GPT-5 simply being able to function as an accounting ledger. So I give it a bank statement, it classifies those things automatically and gives me a balance sheet and a P&L back. And that's like unthinkable and may almost feel wrong. It's like, well, how am I ever going to be able to trust that? Honestly, like there's this old Paul Graham quote. I think it's Paul Graham. He's like, you've already seen the future. You just dismissed it as a toy. And so the notion of AI being able to do that, right? You're like, no, I have a hard time seeing it actually do that. And it would only ever be able to work in very, very simple applications, right? So let's just start there. Because right now I think it already does this good enough for simple use cases. Client gives you a spreadsheet. Or client gives you 12 months of statements that have like virtually no activity in them because they've got this standalone LLC or whatever this dumb little side business is that has virtually no volume. And you're like, don't want to do the bookkeeping for that. It's not big enough to justify it. Like almost every entrepreneur has some of these sort of dumb side companies that are just like off-gassing from their core business. And it grinds your gears to have to pay for another cloud accounting platform subscription just for this dumb little company, right? Feels like a waste of your time having to do the books for this simple little thing. Well, what if we could just chuck those statements or whatever information was required into a ChatGPT conversation and it produces for you a balance sheet, a P&L, and a GL. Maybe even gives you like an Excel download. It is already good enough to do that in very simple ways. And when there's so much debate right now around when are we ever going to get another accounting ledger that will rival QuickBooks and Xero, and when are we going to get the next AI accounting ledger? My take is we're looking at it. If you compare all the horses in the race, I'd have a hard time betting against ChatGPT, just straight up AI models doing this really well. And today, you can only really see that in very simplistic use cases, right? Very small companies. But as AI models continue to improve, the capabilities and what it's able to do, like that just keeps getting better and better, right? And this would already be tremendously useful for us as accounting pros. We end up collecting all these very small, very simplistic accounting files. And maybe you've got an Excel workbook or a QuickBooks desktop file where you're tracking this over time. Man, wouldn't it be nice? Because these models can already flawlessly pull transactions from bank statements. We used to use, auto entry and Dext, and we used to use all these tools to be able to extract transactions from bank statements. That's a thing that it can just do now, no problem. But to be able to just chuck whatever information that you have into it, and it makes sense of all of it, and then organizes it for you, man, that'd be nice. In fact, if we go to the tax source document example here, where it pulls all the data off of it and it puts it into an Excel workbook for you, you can see how it's like, dang, that could be real useful to me real soon. In fact, 12 months from now, 24 months from now, when it can handle 100x the volume, you're like, wow, we're almost certainly using that. Like that's almost certainly saving me a pile of time, right? So where does this live alongside our specialist tools like, let's just say, the full-blown accounting ledger? Well, I think it starts, that is ChatGPT starts at the bottom of the market. And the question will be, how far up does it ever come? Does it actually challenge, $1 million company with very complex needs and all that? I have a hard time imagining it getting up to that because then aspects of the user interface and user access, what people have access to, is much more nuanced problems then. But you could certainly see it nibbling away at the bottom of the market in those very simple use cases. Pretty interesting, and would be a tremendously useful tool for accounting firms, where it's those little trivial things that don't have an off-the-shelf software solution that are our main headaches right now. Like, I don't need another tool that will, help me reconcile my Stripe data back to the accounting file, or some of the bigger, more mainstream problems that a lot of platforms are solving for. That's all fine, and I want them to keep working on that stuff. What's left are the very nuanced headaches that I have today that no platform will ever solve for, because this one client has this one specific problem, and it takes us 3 hours a month to fix it. That's where AI assistants like this are tremendously powerful for us. That's where I may use the machine to build a machine that is AI to write code that is like a custom little bit of software or Excel macro that'll do that 3-hour job for me each month. I always hear and like glorify these people where they get into this job and it's just like jockeying spreadsheets all day and they find a way to automate it, and it turns out they don't actually work at all. Man, you better believe like that stuff's happening at record rates right now with AI assistants. And that's great. The less time we have to spend on those dumb, trivial, like client-specific things, the better. So all in all, GPT-5, it's been a frustrating launch, but I'm seeing promising things right now. In terms of how this changes our behavior, I don't think it actually changes our behavior inside of accounting firms at all. The ceiling for what it can do is now higher, but the day-to-day things that we do as a result, they ought to be the same. We ought to have ChatGPT up on one of your monitors, staring back at you so you remember to use it. We ought to be meeting with our team every single week, sharing, hey, what did we try this week? What worked and what didn't work? Like just creating that space for people to come together every single week, I think right now is essential, because just by being near each other, we get that contact high of seeing what other people are doing and opening our minds a bit to how we could use it. And honestly, that's it. Like get the tool in people's hands, specifically ChatGPT team, but then get everybody together each week. And you wouldn't believe how many problems that solves, from like, well, how do we keep up with each new model? Well, if you're meeting every single week, it'll be part of the conversation. Hopefully on your team, you've got some folks that are like excited by this stuff and it comes easier to them and they can bring a lot of the energy to those meetings so you don't have to do it all yourself, right? So GPT-5, very exciting stuff. Definitely pushed the bar higher for what's possible, but the day-to-day routines and how we're leaning into AI, I don't think it's changed at all. We got to keep doing the same things. We got to keep leaning into the same weekly habits. And hopefully now, AI will take us even further. It'll automate more of that stuff that we don't want to fuss with, right? Hey, if you're new here, subscribe, man. We talk all things accounting from running, oftentimes AI. I think the folks listening to this podcast are like the most ahead of the curve folks when it comes to accounting AI in the profession. And don't you want that to be you, right? Any cool GPT-5 stuff you've done, drop that stuff down in the comments. If you're listening to the audio version, in the show notes, you'll see a link to the YouTube version. Come join the conversation there. Drop any testing you've done down in the comments. We can share some cool ideas. And I'll see you in the next one.